Girl falls victim to racism at luxury party, but when people discover her father's identity, the environment changes completely. Sophie and Charlotte arrived at the grand Chelsea mansion under a starry sky, the soft light of the crystal chandeliers reflecting the opulence of the event. The gentle music of a string quartet filled the air, and the aroma of fresh flowers and newly opened champagne overwhelmed the senses of anyone entering. Sophie, a 22-year-old black woman, felt her heart race as she admired the luxurious scene before her. Despite Charlotte, her longtime friend, being by her side, anxiety consumed her. "You look beautiful, Sophie. Let's shine tonight," Charlotte exclaimed, adjusting the hem of her gala dress. Her blue eyes sparkled with excitement, a striking contrast to Sophie's brown skin, as Sophie struggled to smile, trying to hide the unease that accompanied her. "Thank you, Charlotte. I hope so," Sophie replied, her voice tinged with nervousness. She glanced around, noticing the group of guests observing her with curiosity. "I think I'm a little nervous." "Don't worry. No one here is that important. Just enjoy the party," Charlotte said, pulling Sophie into the mansion. As they entered, the sound of the music intensified and guests scattered in groups, laughing and chatting animatedly. Sophie felt a chill in her stomach. Most of the people there were well-known figures from the British elite, and she couldn't shake off the feeling of being scrutinized. It was as if she were naked before an audience ready to judge her. Charlotte, sensing the tension, held Sophie's hand, offering silent support. "Let's introduce ourselves," Charlotte suggested, tugging Sophie toward a group. "Look, there's Beatrice. She'll love to meet you." Sophie forced a smile as they approached. Beatrice, a wealthy socialite, was surrounded by admirers, her perfectly styled blonde hair and silk dress shimmering under the light. When Charlotte introduced her, Beatrice cast a scrutinizing glance at Sophie that made her feel like an object on display. "Oh, so you're Charlotte's friend," Beatrice said, her sweet tone masking a hint of disdain. "I didn't know the elite was diversifying. It must be a refreshing change, right?" Sophie felt her face heat with the implication. "Yes, I'm grateful for the opportunity to be here," she responded, trying to maintain her composure. The conversation continued, but the atmosphere at the table grew increasingly tense. Sophie noticed the looks of contempt and curiosity did not fade. She struggled to integrate herself, but the feeling of displacement wrapped around her like a thick fog. After a few moments, Beatrice made a comment that made Sophie's stomach churn. "You know, I've always thought that what matters is appearance, and you, dear, have an interesting style. It's like you're trying to stand out, but sometimes less is more," she said, causing some guests to laugh nervously. Sophie felt the pressure in her chest rise, and in a burst of impulse, she decided to step away. "Excuse me, I need a moment," she murmured to Charlotte, who looked concerned. Sophie distanced herself from the group and found a small side garden, where the cool breeze embraced her. She leaned against a stone wall, trying to regain her composure. In the garden, the lighting was softer and the well-tended flowers seemed to offer silent solace. Sophie began to reflect on her life and the social disparities surrounding her. It was then that she spotted David, an old acquaintance from her childhood, now standing out among the guests. Her heart raced, but hope quickly faded when he ignored her, turning to chat with another group. "Just another day like any other," she murmured to herself, feeling the sting of rejection. The image of David, now so successful and distant, made her question her worth. Why did she still care about their acceptance? Charlotte soon appeared, looking worried. "Sophie, are you okay? What happened?" I need a moment to breathe. It's all so oppressive," Sophie admitted, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to spill. Charlotte stepped forward, empathy in her gaze. "Don't let them affect you. They're just insecure, trying to maintain their appearances. You are amazing, and that won't change because of some mean comments." Before we continue with this emotional story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any stories, and let us know which city you're watching this video from in the comments. Sophie shook her head, grateful but unsure if she could believe Charlotte's words. "It's easy to say, Charlotte, but it's not just about that. I feel like an intruder here." You're not an intruder. You're the host's friend and you deserve to be here just as much as anyone else, Charlotte insisted. But Sophie realized that her friend's confidence came from ignorance about the depth of the situation. As they talked, Sophie knew that the party still awaited her, filled with glances and judgments. What should have been a celebration had turned into an emotional battlefield, and she needed to find a way to cope before the night became unbearable. Sophie stood in the garden, the gentle breeze of the night contrasting with the oppression she felt inside the mansion. The bright lights of the ball dimmed slightly in the distance, and she sought a moment of peace among the well-tended flowers. The distant murmurs of the party felt like an echo of a reality that wasn't hers. She leaned against a tree trunk, closing her eyes for a moment, trying to push away the voices surrounding her, the nervous laughter that made her feel like a stranger in a crowd. Meanwhile, the sound of a door opening made her look up. It was Charlotte, her friend, who had followed her out. She looked radiant, her gala dress flowing around her. But the confident smile Sophie knew seemed a bit more subdued. "Sophie, are you okay?" Charlotte asked, concern lacing her voice. I just need a moment," Sophie replied, trying to smile. "It's all so different here." Charlotte hesitated, studying her friend's expression. "You know you can count on me, right? They're not that terrible." "Are they not?" Sophie raised an eyebrow, recalling Beatrice's joke and the laughter that followed. "It feels like I'm some sort of exotic attraction for them." "That's not it?" Charlotte exclaimed, a bit defensively. They don't know you. Once you introduce yourself, everything will get better." Sophie sighed, feeling frustration well up inside her. "It's not about that, Charlotte." "I don't want to be a curiosity to them. I am more than that." Charlotte was about to respond, but the sound of laughter interrupted them. Sophie saw a group of young people approaching, and her stomach churned. "Let's go back," Charlotte suggested, pulling Sophie by the hand, but the young woman hesitated, feeling paralyzed. The last thing she wanted was to face those looks again. When they finally decided to return to the party, Sophie found herself once again at the center of attention, but this time not in a positive way. Beatrice was there, surrounded by a crowd of admirers who listened to her with rapt attention. Upon seeing Sophie, her eyes sparkled with hidden malice. "Oh, look who's here," Beatrice said, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "The new sensation of the elite. Sophie, darling, are you having fun?" Sophie forced a smile, but Beatrice's tone bothered her. "Yes, thank you very much," she replied, trying to maintain her composure. Beatrice laughed sarcastically. "It's good to see you're comfortable. After all, you're only here because of your father, right?" The last phrase was accompanied by nervous laughter from other guests. Sophie felt her face flush, a mix of anger and humiliation washing over her. She looked at Charlotte, who clearly felt uncomfortable but didn't know how to intervene. "You know this is a big farce, right?" Sophie replied, her voice firm yet trembling, betraying her vulnerability. "I'm not a trophy." Beatrice, sensing that the situation was shifting, tried to ease the, "Oh, sweetheart, it was just a joke, come on. Let's take a picture together, that should cheer you up." But Sophie perceived the insincerity blatantly in her words. Deciding she needed more space, she stepped away, seeking refuge once again in the garden. The cool breeze welcomed her, but insecurity followed like a shadow. It was then, to her surprise, that she found David, an old acquaintance from her childhood. He was there amidst the elite, but when he saw her, his gaze shifted as if he wanted to ignore her. "David," Sophie exclaimed, a glimmer of hope lighting up her face. "It's you." He hesitated before turning around, and when he did, his expression was one of recognition but also discomfort. "Hi, Sophie, I didn't see you arrive." "Yeah, it seems not," she replied, trying to hide her disappointment. "How are you?" "Fine. Life is different now," he said, looking at the ground. "And you? What are you doing here?" "I'm here with Charlotte, but, well, I'm not feeling very welcomed." Sophie let out a sad smile. "And you? Enjoying the party?" David gave a half smile, but his eyes showed a certain sadness. "It's all a bit Superficial, isn't it? Exactly, Sophie agreed, relieved to find someone who also understood the futility of that environment. I wish people cared more about who we are than about who our parents are. You deserve more than this, David said, now looking directly at her. You've always been more than someone's daughter. Sophie felt a wave of emotion, a sense of connection she hadn't experienced in a long time. Thank you, David. It's good to know there are still people who see beyond appearances. The atmosphere between them shifted, but soon Charlotte appeared, interrupting the moment. She looked between the two and a slight discomfort settled in. Sorry to interrupt, but is everything okay here? Sophie hesitated before replying. Yeah, we were just reminiscing about the past. Charlotte smiled, but the tension was palpable. Sophie felt that something had changed, that the barrier between her and Charlotte was widening, while her connection with David seemed stronger than ever. The night was far from over, but Sophie knew she was about to make decisions that could change Eva. Sophie was in a corner of the hall when she heard her father's name mentioned, as if the air around her had changed in density. Henry, the host of the ball, had just addressed a group of guests surrounding her, and their previously lively conversation now seemed to have taken a new turn. Did you know Sophie is the daughter of William Carter, the real estate mogul? It's impressive how the new generation stands out, he said with a smile that couldn't hide his curiosity. The guests' faces instantly changed. Looks that had once been indifferent were now filled with interest. Sophie felt her stomach turn. It was as if she had been thrown into a cage, and everyone there were the curious observers, ready to reach out and touch the skin of the beast. Really? I didn't know that, said a woman in a vibrant red dress, her eyes sparkling with the revelation. I always thought she had a unique presence, but that connection makes all the sense. Sophie felt a heat rise to her face. This isn't a popularity contest, she thought. They don't care who I am, but what my father represents. The superficiality of the interactions deeply unsettled her. Charlotte, who had been observing the transformation in the guests' behavior, approached Sophie. Are you okay? She asked, her expression a mix of concern and confusion. I didn't expect this to happen. I'm great, Sophie replied, forcing a smile. It's just funny how people change their attitude. Before I was just Charlotte's friend. Now I'm the daughter of the magnate. Charlotte frowned, unsure. It's not that bad, is it? You could use this to your advantage. Use it? Sophie repeated, anger swelling within her. You don't understand. They're only interested in my last name, not me. Charlotte looked at the ground, unsure of what to say. Sophie could see her friend's internal struggle, her desire to help mixed with the social pressure now surrounding her. Sophie, I just want you to feel good here. You don't get it, Charlotte. I don't feel good here. I don't belong to this world, Sophie said, her voice rising. My feelings are just an accessory to them, like the jewelry they wear. In the distance, Beatrice watched the scene with a sarcastic smile on her lips. Determined to undermine Sophie, she approached, her presence heavy and arrogant. Oh, Sophie, I didn't know you were a Carter. That explains a lot. It must be easy for you to fit in places like this, right? She let out a laugh as if she were making an internal joke just for her friends. Sophie felt her blood boil. I'm not here because of my father, Beatrice. I'm here because I'm Charlotte's friend, she replied, her voice controlled yet firm. Beatrice raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Oh, sure. But it's interesting how the right connections can open doors, isn't it? You must be enjoying this night to the fullest. Sophie could no longer take it. If you truly think my worth is tied to what my father did or what he has, you are very mistaken. I am more than a surname, and that is something you will never understand. The atmosphere around them seemed to freeze, murmurs and approving glances emerging among the guests. Charlotte watched, perplexed, as the tension in the room escalated. Beatrice, visibly annoyed, tried to regain control of the situation, but Sophie had already stepped back, feeling as if she had freed herself from an invisible prison. The crowd began to divide, some applauding Sophie, while others whispered about her oh. She turned to Charlotte, who was looking at her with a mix of admiration and concern. What am I doing here, Charlotte? This place isn't for me. You're standing up for yourself, Sophie. And that's important, Charlotte said, her voice trembling slightly. But what I don't understand is why you feel this way. I want to help, but it seems like you're pushing me away. I just need some time to figure all of this out, Sophie replied, her gaze drifting into the crowd surrounding her. It's not about you, it's about me in this place. I can't just ignore what's happened. Charlotte nodded, realizing that their friendship was being tested in a way she had never imagined. It was a decisive moment, and Sophie knew she was just beginning to understand what it truly meant to be seen and heard in a world that often overlooked her true essence. Sophie surveyed the ballroom filled with guests, each more elegantly dressed than the last as tension grew within her. The soft music playing in the background could not drown out the whispers and furtive glances that followed her. Beatrice, with her sharp smile and critical gaze, was about to cross the line once more. "Oh, Sophie, dear, you look so different," Beatrice began, her melodic voice carrying a tone of sarcasm that made Sophie's stomach churn. "Don't worry, dear. I'm sure you're only here because of your father. After all, who else would have the courage to show up at an event like this?" Those words cut like a sharp blade. Sophie felt anger bubbling inside her, but at the same time a wave of insecurity washed over her. The other guests around them laughed nervously, some exchanging knowing glances, as if the hypocrisy of the situation were a private joke. "And you, Beatrice? Are you here because of your fortune or your lack of character?" Sophie shot back, her voice steady, though her heart raced. She would not allow herself to back down. Beatrice raised an eyebrow, surprised by Sophie's boldness. "Oh dear, don't take offense, I'm just trying to be friendly. After all, it's tough to feel at home outside your bubble, isn't it?" Sophie took a deep breath, feeling the weight of everyone's gaze on her. It was as if the room had shrunk, all eyes now fixated on her. Charlotte, watching from a distance, was in shock at her friend's transformation. She felt powerless, unsure how to intervene without making things worse. "Friendship isn't built on jokes and belittling others, Beatrice," Sophie continued, her voice stronger now. "I don't have time for your hypocrisy. If you truly cared, you would have made a real effort to get to know me." Beatrice, realizing she had lost control of the situation, decided to change tactics. "Oh, Sophie, you're so sensitive. I'm just joking. We all know society has its peculiarities. You must understand that, right?" The room fell silent, and Sophie felt the pressure mount. Understand that some think they are better than others because of their backgrounds? Yes, I understand that very well. But I will not silence myself to please you, she replied, her voice now echoing throughout the room. The atmosphere quickly turned hostile. Other guests began to divide, some whispering in support of Sophie, while others looked on disapprovingly. Charlotte, with her heart in her throat, tried to intervene. "Sophie, maybe we should step outside for some fresh air." "No, Charlotte. I need to do this," Sophie replied, keeping her gaze locked on Beatrice, who was now visibly annoyed. "I need to show all of you that this is unacceptable." Beatrice crossed her arms, dismissing Sophie's courage. "And what exactly are you going to do? Expose the truth? We all know that deep down you're only here because of your surname. Without it, where would you be? Maybe you should ask yourself where you would be without your fortune and connections, Beatrice," Sophie retorted, her voice loud enough for everyone in the room to hear. "You are no better than me, and I am not less than you." Murmurs intensified, and Sophie, realizing she was distancing herself from the group, decided she could no longer stay there. She turned and walked toward an isolated sitting room surrounded by paintings and art pieces. The atmosphere was calmer, but the weight of what had just happened still rested heavily on her shoulders. Raising her head, she gazed at the artworks, pondering whether she would ever truly be accepted in that world. What was a gala for many felt like a battlefield to her, and Sophie knew she could not turn back. She was determined to fight against the hypocrisy surrounding her, and that would require more than just courage. It would require authenticity. Sophie withdrew to the isolated sitting room, her heart still racing after the tense confrontation with Beatrice. The space was adorned with imposing artworks and luxurious furniture, but none of it could calm her mind. Beatrice's words echoed in her head, and the feeling of being a pawn in a power game made her feel suffocated. She sat on a blue velvet sofa, observing the paintings that adorned the walls. Each piece seemed to tell a story, but none compared to hers. As she reflected on the superficiality of the elite, the door opened gently and David entered, surprise evident on his face upon seeing her there. He hesitated for a moment, as if unsure whether to approach. "Sophie, is that you?" he asked, his voice laced with disbelief. Sophie looked up at him, recognizing her childhood friend, but now in a context that made her uncomfortable. "Yes, it's me." "It's strange to be here, isn't it?" she replied, her voice trembling. David moved closer, sitting in the opposite armchair. "Yeah, I didn't expect to see you. What do you think of the party?" "A spectacle of hypocrisy," Sophie said, frustration seeping through her words. "People smile, but looks like Beatrice's tell me I'm not welcome here." David leaned forward, his eyes reflecting genuine understanding. "I get it. I've been through this too. I remember school, the looks, the jokes behind my back. Things haven't changed much, have they?" Sophie sighed, feeling comfortable enough to share her pain. "It's hard. I feel like I'm always trying to prove my worth, but it seems like they only see what's on the surface." "You don't need to prove anything to anyone," David replied, the sincerity in his words echoing in the empty room. "When I entered this world, I thought people would be different. But I found out that most of them are just superficial. They care more about status than authenticity." Sophie crossed her arms, deep in thought. "But what if authenticity isn't enough? What if I'm not accepted for being who I am?" "You are more than what they think," David said firmly. "And don't let their opinions dictate your worth. You have a voice, a story. Use that to your advantage." "It's easy for you to say, David. You have a name that commands respect. I'm just the daughter of someone they see as a mogul but probably don't truly respect," Sophie shot back, bitterness tinting her voice. "Maybe, but you are still you. And your story isn't just about your last name. Remember who you are and where you came from. That can't be taken from you," he insisted, his penetrating gaze searching hers. The conversation flowed, and Sophie began to feel a spark of hope, a connection she hadn't felt in a long time. David's vulnerability, his struggle against discrimination, resonated deeply within her. "You're right. I need to assert myself more. I can't let their opinions define me." At that moment, Charlotte entered the room, her eyes wide as she saw Sophie and David together. "What's going on here?" she asked, a mix of surprise and concern in her tone. "We were just talking," Sophie replied, trying to remain calm. Charlotte noticed the intensity of the conversation and the tension in the air. "Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but Sophie, are you okay? I saw what happened out there." "I'm not sure if I'm okay, but I'm trying to understand all of this," Sophie admitted, her voice softer. Charlotte looked at David, realizing the connection that had formed between them. I care about you, Sophie. This party is a trap. I don't want you to feel alone." Sophie hesitated, remembering the superficiality she'd experienced up to that point. "Sometimes it feels like you don't understand what I'm feeling, like you're in a world apart." "I want to understand," Charlotte replied, sincerity in her eyes. "Please let me help." "Help isn't just about what you can do, but also about what you can understand," Sophie said, a bit more firmly. "And I need some time to process all of this." David, sensing the rising tension, decided to intervene. "Charlotte, maybe it's best to let Sophie have her space for now. Sometimes we need to face our own demons alone." Charlotte looked at Sophie, seeking an answer. "Are you sure you're okay?" "Yes, I just need a moment," Sophie affirmed, feeling stronger from her conversation with David. "Thank you for caring. But right now, I need to step away a little." As Charlotte left, Sophie turned her attention back to David, determined not to be brought down. "I will assert myself. I'm ready to face this." The atmosphere in the mansion was charged with tension, as if everyone present were holding their breath while watching the impending clash unfold. Sophie, standing in the middle of the circle of guests, felt Beatrice's gaze like a sharp blade, ready to cut. The elegantly soft music from the ballroom seemed distant, muffled by the emotional turmoil unraveling in her mind. "Do you really think you belong here, dear?" Beatrice shot back, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "It's funny how some people become famous just for being someone's child. What have you really done to deserve to be here?" The growing murmur that followed Beatrice's provocation made Sophie's heart race. She could feel the pressure of all the eyes, curiosity and disdain mixed into one. However, instead of backing down, something inside her ignited. Sophie's chin lifted, and she took a deep breath, determined not to let the hypocrisy of that elite crowd bring her down. "Funny, Beatrice," Sophie began, her voice steady. "But I'm not here because of my father. I'm here because my friend invited me. And if you can't see beyond the last name, maybe the problem lies with you, not me." The murmurs intensified, and some guests began exchanging worried glances. Beatrice, though surprised by Sophie's response, wasn't willing to let the confrontation slip away. She smiled, but it was a cruel smile. "Oh dear, you can say whatever you want, but the truth is we all know you don't fit in here. Your father may have money, but that doesn't buy class." "Class?" Sophie repeated, incredulity echoing in her words. "Do you really think being cruel and superficial is synonymous with class? What you call class is just a mask, and I'm tired of people like you who hide behind a smile and pretty words while perpetuating elitism." The mood at the party shifted rapidly, and Sophie felt the energy vibrate as if the guests were ready to take sides. Charlotte, who had been watching the scene with her mouth agape, finally approached, realizing the situation was becoming unsustainable. "Sophie, maybe we should—" Charlotte began, but Sophie interrupted her. "No, Charlotte, I'm not going to be silent. It's time to face the truth. If you think the friendship we have can protect me from this kind of people, you're mistaken. I don't want friends who can't see reality." "But you don't have to do this alone," Charlotte exclaimed, desperation in her voice. "I'm here to support you." "Support me how? Applauding my humiliation? You can't protect me from the hypocrisy that's ingrained in this elite that you admire so much." "I'm not going to be silenced by what you and your friends think of me," Sophie retorted, the passion in her words igniting the atmosphere. Beatrice, realizing that the crowd was starting to divide, decided to intensify her attack. "You can scream and thrash, but at the end of the day, you'll still be seen as an intruder, a fish out of water. No one cares about what you think." "And you think I care about your opinion?" Sophie shot back, now more confident. "What matters to me is being true to myself. And if that means I won't be accepted in this place, then so be it. I don't want to be part of a society that measures people's worth by their last name or the color of their skin." The murmurs turned into soft applause, some guests clearly admiring Sophie's courage. Beatrice, realizing her strategy was failing, shot an angry glance at the crowd. "You're being swept away by a spectacle," she said, her voice laden with disdain. "Don't forget who you are." "And who are we, Beatrice?" Sophie challenged, now feeling more empowered. "Human beings or merely puppets in a game that you control? I choose not to be part of this circus." Charlotte, finally grasping the depth of Sophie's struggle, felt torn. The friendship she had always valued was being tested, and the true nature of the elite life she had been part of was revealing itself in a cruel manner. She looked at Sophie, trying to find the right words, but Sophie's strength and determination were inspiring. Sophie, realizing she could no longer bear the weight of hypocrisy, decided it was time to leave. With a firm look, she bid farewell to Charlotte, who implored her to stay. "Sophie, no. Please don't go. I didn't know this would happen." "Charlotte, I need space. I need to understand who I am, away from this farce," Sophie replied, her voice trembling yet resolute. "If you truly are my friend, you'll understand." And so, with her head held high and her heart pounding with courage, Sophie left the party, determined not to let the hypocrisy that surrounded her affect her any longer. Sophie stepped out of the mansion with her heart racing, adrenaline still coursing through her veins after her confrontation with Beatrice. The cold night air wrapped around her like a hug, and as she distanced herself from the opulence of the party, she felt a mix of relief and determination. She no longer wanted to be just an intruder in that world of pretense and hypocrisy. The distant sound of voices made her stop. Curious, she moved closer, and soon spotted a group of protesters in front of a neighboring building. The signs and shouts for social justice drew her in like a beacon in the dark. "We cannot remain silent. Inequality must end," shouted a woman with curly hair, raising her fist in protest. Sophie felt an urge to join those voices calling for change. "Can I join you?" Sophie asked, her voice steady, but still a bit unsure. The woman looked at her, surprised that someone so well-dressed had approached. "Of course. The more the merrier. We're fighting against the inequality and elitism that dominate this city," the woman replied, her encouraging smile warming Sophie's heart. Sophie joined the group, holding a sign that read, "Justice for all." The words filled her with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in a long time. Next to her, other protesters began to sing, and Sophie let herself be swept up in the collective energy. The sense of belonging she had always sought seemed to be right there, among those who shared in their struggles. Meanwhile, inside the mansion, Charlotte was grappling with her own demons. The pain of rejection and the discomfort of witnessing the separation between her and Sophie gnawed at her. What she had thought was a solid friendship now felt fragile, like glass on the verge of shattering. With renewed determination, she sought out Beatrice, who was surrounded by a group of other guests, trying to regain her composure after the chaos of the ball. "Beatrice, we need to talk," Charlotte said, her assertive tone surprising the socialite. "About what, dear? About how your friend challenged the natural order of things?" Beatrice replied with a disdainful smile. "About how your words can hurt people. Sophie deserves respect, just like anyone here." Charlotte felt more confident with each word, the need to defend her friend overcoming her fear. "Oh, Charlotte, do you really think you're saving the world? She was here because of her father, and you know that. We can't allow people like her to infiltrate our circle," Beatrice retorted, the coldness in her gaze revealing her true nature. "If you continue with this mindset, you'll lose more than a friendship, Beatrice. People are starting to see the truth about you and your attitudes," Charlotte warned, holding her head high. Her expression was a mix of anger and sadness. Back at the protest, Sophie felt revitalized. The echo of her words resonated in her mind as she joined the chorus of demonstrators. "Inequality is not just a class issue, but a matter of humanity," she shouted, her voice ringing out in the crowd. Around her, faces lit up with hope, and Sophie felt the energy of the struggle pulse through her veins. "That's right. We need more voices like yours." A woman with a megaphone cheered, and Sophie smiled, feeling part of something greater. Meanwhile, Charlotte finally confronted Beatrice. "You need to change, Beatrice. Your narrow and prejudiced view has no place in a world that is evolving. If you can't see the value in everyone, then I don't want to be part of it." Beatrice stared at her, surprised by Charlotte's courage. "Are you willing to go against me for a girl who doesn't belong in this world?" "It's not about belonging, but about humanity, Beatrice. If you can't understand that, maybe you need to reassess your priorities," Charlotte replied, determination shining in her eyes as she challenged the socialite. Outside, Sophie, noticing it was starting to get dark, looked at the group of protesters and felt stronger than ever. She knew she was ready to fight, not just for herself but for all those who never had the chance to be heard. And as the crowd continued to shout for justice, a new determination ignited within her, a flame that could not be extinguished. Sophie had always had a passion for art, but her experience at the ball had sparked a fire inside her that could not be ignored. Determined to make a meaningful impact, she began actively engaging in social causes, seeking ways to give a voice to the marginalized. With the help of her friend Charlotte, who had now become a more conscious ally, Sophie planned an art exhibition that would highlight artists from underrepresented communities. Excitement engulfed her, and the idea of creating a space where voices like hers could be heard propelled her forward. On a rainy afternoon, Sophie and Charlotte met at a cafe in Chelsea. Raindrops slid down the windows while the aroma of fresh coffee filled the air. Charlotte looked at Sophie, who was engrossed in her sketches. "Do you really think this will work?" Charlotte asked, concern lacing her voice. "I mean, the elite might not be interested in art that isn't tied to their status." Sophie looked up, determination shining in her eyes. "We need to challenge that idea, Charlotte. Art is not just about status. It's about expression, about telling stories that are often ignored. I want people to see the beauty in experiences that many consider irrelevant." Charlotte nodded slowly, feeling Sophie's passion. "Okay, let's do this. I'll use my social circle to help promote the exhibition. We need sponsors, people who care about change." "Thank you, that means a lot to me," Sophie replied, a radiant smile on her face. "Let's do this together." As they began sketching out plans, Sophie felt a renewed sense of purpose. She reached out to artists from diverse backgrounds and started selecting works that depicted the struggle and resilience of their communities. Each new piece she received filled her with hope and determination. Months passed, and finally, the day of the exhibition opening arrived. The space they had chosen was a renovated warehouse filled with natural light and white walls that served as a blank canvas for the artworks. Sophie was nervous, but the energy in the room buzzed with anticipation. Charlotte helped her organize the final details, from arranging the artworks to selecting beverages. "Look, Sophie, people are starting to arrive," Charlotte exclaimed, watching the movement at the entrance. Sophie's anxiety grew, but she took a deep breath, reminding herself that this was the opportunity to show the world that art could be a powerful tool for change. As guests began to circulate through the gallery, Sophie noticed that the diversity of the works was attracting a lot of attention. She approached a group of people admiring a vibrant painting depicting a peaceful protest. "This piece is incredible, isn't it?" a woman said, marveling at the artwork. "The way it captures struggle and strength is breathtaking." "Yes, the artist was inspired by her own experiences," Sophie replied, her heart racing. She wanted to show that every story is important and deserves to be told. However, amidst the celebration, a feeling of tension lingered in the air. Sophie couldn't help but notice some familiar faces from the elite who had previously ignored her at the ball. Beatrice was among them, wearing a forced smile, trying to appear genuine. "Look who's here," Beatrice said, approaching Sophie with an air of superiority. "How interesting to see you promoting this exhibition. It's nice to see you keeping busy, dear." Sophie frowned, recalling Beatrice's cruel words at the ball. "Thank you, Beatrice. I'm glad you decided to come. Perhaps you can see the value in voices that are usually ignored." Beatrice hesitated, clearly uncomfortable, but before she could respond, Charlotte intervened. "Sophie has done an incredible job here. It's important for all of us to be open to new perspectives." As the night progressed, Sophie felt stronger and more confident. She had created a space where hypocrisy had no place. Before stepping away to give a speech, she looked at Charlotte and said, "No matter what happens, I'm grateful to have you by my side." Charlotte smiled, filled with pride. "We're in this together. Let's show them what really matters." And so, Sophie took to the small makeshift stage, ready to speak about the importance of art and equality, aware that she was becoming the voice she had always wanted to be. The night of the art exhibition Sophie had organized had arrived, and the atmosphere was electrically charged. Guests clustered around the displayed works, celebrating the diversity and struggles of artists from marginalized communities. Bright lights reflected off the faces of attendees, but it was Sophie's presence that truly illuminated the space. She looked radiant in a deep blue silk dress, her eyes shining with determination and hope. Meanwhile, Beatrice, surrounded by a group of aristocrats, Sophie's smile, now a central figure of the event, irritated her deeply. "I can't believe this exhibition is attracting so much attention," Beatrice murmured to her friends, her tone dripping with contempt. Just another attempt to turn social struggle into a spectacle. One of her friends, champagne glass in hand, agreed. just waiting for someone to expose her. It's nothing but a ploy for notoriety. Across the room, Sophie was engrossed in a conversation with a reporter who was interviewing her about her journey and the significance of the exhibition. For me, this exhibition is more than just art. It's a platform for voices that often go unheard, she said, gesturing to the works around her. The elite need to understand that elitism perpetuates inequality, and it's our duty to challenge it. And how do you feel about the criticisms you've received from some members of the elite? The reporter asked, leaning in, intrigued. Sophie took a deep breath, recalling Beatrice's cutting remarks and the disdain she had faced at the ball. Criticism is inevitable when you challenge the status quo, but true change never comes without resistance. I'm here to stay, she replied confidently. Meanwhile, the mood in the room was shifting. Beatrice, realizing her influence was waning, decided to lie. She approached a group of guests, including Charlotte, who was trying to absorb everything. Do you really believe this exhibition is anything more than a sham? Beatrice questioned, raising her voice to be heard. Sophie is only here because of her last name. Without her father, no one would pay attention to her. Charlotte couldn't stay silent any longer. Beatrice, that's just cruel. Sophie has worked hard to get here. You can't belittle her achievements like that. Beatrice, challenged, turned to Charlotte with a sarcastic smile. Oh, but it's the truth. And let's be honest, your support for her just makes you another one of those who can't see reality. The reporter, overhearing the exchange, saw an opportunity. Sophie, what do you think of Beatrice's claim? Do you feel your success is a reflection of your heritage? Sophie, seizing the moment, chose not to be intimidated. I am not my last name. I am a woman who has fought against adversity, and this exhibition is proof of that. I will not allow the hypocrisy of the elite to define who I am or what I can achieve, she declared, her voice firm and clear. Murmurs among the guests began to rise, and the tension in the room escalated. Some started to applaud Sophie's courage, while others shot disapproving looks at Beatrice. Realizing the situation was spiraling out of her control, Beatrice tried to retreat, but it was too late. This is your version of the truth, Sophie, but you can't change reality, Beatrice insisted, her voice already trembling. People are only here because of the novelty. Tomorrow, all of this will be forgotten. Sophie didn't hesitate. What you consider novelty is, in fact, a call to action, and I don't intend to be forgotten. Her determination resonated in the room, and a growing group of guests began to support her. Charlotte, witnessing Sophie's transformation and Beatrice's resistance, realized her friend was becoming a true leader. I'm here for you, Sophie. I will always be, she said, a look of admiration in her eyes. The reporter, excited by the unfolding situation, knew he had a sensational story on his hands. What's the next step for you, Sophie? What can we expect after this exhibition? With a confident smile, Sophie looked around, absorbing the support now surrounding her. The next step is to continue the fight, to use my voice and this platform to give space to others who don't have one. Change begins now. The room, once tense, was now filled with vibrant energy. Sophie felt she was on the right path, and the hypocrisy that had once oppressed her began to fade in the face of her strength and authenticity. During the opening of the much-anticipated art exhibition, the atmosphere was electrically tense. Sophie, in a stunning dress that reflected not only her beauty but also her newfound confidence, stepped onto the stage. The hall was packed with elite guests, journalists, and art critics, all eyes on her. Charlotte, by her side, felt a mix of pride and apprehension, knowing this moment was crucial. Sophie took a deep breath and, with a firm voice, began her speech. Today, we are here not just to celebrate art, but to challenge the narratives that have been imposed upon us. Art is a reflection of society, and it's time we give voice to those who have been silenced. The audience fell silent, absorbing her words. She continued, You may not know, but the true identity of my father, William Carter, is a secret many are aware of, yet few have the courage to reveal. A murmur swept through the room. Beatrice, standing in the front row, began to sweat. Sophie stared at her with determination. My father is not just a real estate magnate. He is a tireless advocate for social causes, something you, Beatrice, have always tried to hide. The socialite began to visibly panic, her hands trembling as she tried to regain her composure. How dare you speak like that? Beatrice shouted, attempting to deflect attention. You don't belong in this world. You're nothing but a shadow of what he represents. But that's exactly what you don't understand, Sophie replied, her tone calm contrasting with Beatrice's growing anger. The shadow you're trying to erase now shines brighter than any of your illusory standards of acceptance. My father has always fought for justice and equality, and I am here to continue what he started. And now, all of you need to decide which side you're on. Charlotte, sensing the tension escalating, decided to intervene. Beatrice, it's time for you to be held accountable for your actions. You tried to undermine Sophie, but today she rises, and we all must stand with her. The hypocrisy you've perpetuated is being unmasked here and now. The audience began to react. Some people stood to applaud Sophie, while others looked at Beatrice with disapproval. The elite, who had once seemed so united, were now divided. What do you have to say about this, Beatrice? A guest asked, crossing their arms. I have nothing to say, Beatrice stammered, her mask of confidence slipping. This is absurd. This exhibition is a farce. A farce is living a life of lies, Sophie responded, her voice resonating firm and clear. And the truth is, you're afraid. Afraid of what authenticity might do to your privileges. Beatrice, realizing she was being unmasked, turned to the door, trying to escape the embarrassing situation. But not before Sophie concluded. True art is not about who you know or what you possess. It's about the impact we leave on the world. And I promise my impact will be positive, true, and inclusive. The hall erupted in applause and cheers of support. Sophie radiated, a smile of satisfaction lighting up her face. Charlotte, emotional, hugged Sophie. You were amazing. I've never seen you so strong. Thank you, Charlotte. This was all for us, for everyone who has been silenced, Sophie replied, looking into her friend's eyes. And now, we will continue to fight together. In that moment, Sophie realized that the struggle wasn't just hers, but for all those who felt out of place and devalued. The transformation of her life was just beginning. The final scene unfolded with Sophie receiving an award for her social contributions. The camera flashes illuminated her face, but she was not there for the glory. I'm here for all of us, she said to the audience, her eyes shining with determination. Meanwhile, Charlotte, now by her side, promised to be a true ally. Together we will make a difference, she declared, and Sophie nodded, knowing that although there was much to be done, true change had already begun. The scene closed with Sophie looking towards the horizon, a symbol of hope in the fight for equality and justice.